Welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming. All right, everybody. So welcome to our Line of Sight podcast, where today I'm talking with Rob Eubanks, who, and there's actually a number of things I want to talk to him about, but today we're going to focus on the fact that he's been wargaming longer than probably most of my listeners have been alive. Sorry, Rob. That's not a shot at you or anything.
Oh,
But no, we're going to talk to what I call a veteran wargamer. The first episode of this podcast was talking to someone who was brand new in the hobby. So I talked to Josh. He'd been in the hobby for less than a year. So I thought, well, let's compare that with someone who's been wargaming for a really long time. So I'll start off by asking you the same question I ask everyone else. How'd you get into mini wargaming?
I started dabbling with board games when I first got into gaming. My dad was career Army, so I always had an interest in the military history and stuff. So I guess I actually started out playing with like the Airfix toy soldiers, little plastics toy soldiers, those and the Roco mini tanks, and sandboxes outside, when I was a kid. And so I guess actually that's how I got into it, because I went from that to doing board games, which was a little more sophisticated, but I really missed the aesthetic aspect of 3D of a miniature soldier and miniature tanks and stuff. So probably about 1973, a friend of mine and I drove up to somewhere in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. There was a game shop there that sold military miniatures. And so we bought World War I Navy fleets to play, like Battle of Jutland and stuff like that. So that was my first real wargaming miniatures, other than just playing with toy soldiers in the sand. So.
With a set amount of rules rather than you and just a friend making stuff up as you go.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And then from there, did you mostly do historicals? Because today you play everything. You've done sci-fi, you've done fantasy. So it was historical for a while. When did you make the jump to, or how did you make the jump to other stuff?
I don't think I really started playing anything other than historicals until I opened that first shop, Waterloo Minis, in Ashland back in 2007 or so. I mean, all I did was historical minis. I didn't have the budget when I was growing up as a kid to. Honestly, I'm not even sure Games Workshop was around in the 70s, were they?
It was pretty young. I recall they were still getting started trying to sell D&D stuff.
Really?
Which is how they got their takeoff. Because of the name of their company, when Dungeons & Dragons wanted to expand to Britain, they looked them up. They basically looked for a distributor like Games Workshop. Well, that sounds like someone we could work with. So they got lucky.
There really wasn't. When I was in high school, there was no 40K or Warhammer Fantasy or any of that kind of stuff. So
all wargaming was historical.
It was pretty much all historical. There was D&D. I mean, D&D was literally the little white box with the 3 pamphlets in it. I mean, it was the original D&D, which I had years ago and still wish I had. But yeah, it was all historical. So I don't think I played anything non-historical until I opened Waterloo Minis back in 2007.
And then was it like a customer introduced you, or just as a store owner you heard about it?
So, well, it was really a customer, really. When I opened it up, somehow I got connected with a guy who was big into playing War Machine from Privateer Press.
Okay.
So that was when War Machine was out, and it was really just hitting the market. It was really big. Hordes hadn't even come out yet. It was literally just War Machine. So we started playing War Machine, and then somebody said something about, you really need to get into Games Workshop stuff, get into 40K. So I ordered some 40K and then some Warhammer Fantasy for people, and then I just started playing it. I got interested in it. So I like sci-fi and fantasy. I mean, sci-fi is one of my favorite genres of movies and books to read. So I like that whole aspect of it, and I'm a big Terminator fan. So my first fantasy sci-fi army was Necrons. So
okay. When you said Terminator, I thought like Space Marine Terminator.
Oh yeah, no.
Okay, so big into the
Terminator.
Necron aesthetic.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I'm that old, so I didn't know. I knew what the Terminator was before I knew what Space Marine Terminators were.
Well, I mean, when you said that you first got introduced when you opened that shop back in the early 70s, that was before I was born. So I wasn't kidding, folks, when I said Rob's been gaming longer than probably most of us have been alive.
It's been a while.
So today, then, would you say you do more historical, you do more sci-fi fantasy, or do you balance? What seems to be your forte today?
Honestly, once I opened this shop, as you've seen, since you're a regular here too, I mean, I've run out of time to game. I don't get to game nearly as much as I used to. So I definitely play more historical. because I still maintain my weekly game with Ron and JD and my historical gaming buddies. So I do more historicals, and that's my main love anyway. Honestly, part of the reason that historicals are my main love is because I'm old enough now that there's too many make-believe aspects of sci-fi and fantasy gaming. With historicals, I can base it on books I've read and things I know already.
Yeah, it's pinned down. The narrative's pinned down. But
right.
Then again, I mean, you look at bolt action. I figured they would have run out of World War II battles to do, but it doesn't seem like they have. You can find new ones all the time.
Yeah. Well, they're good at creating new books for different scenarios. Or they'll do a book on a theater, and then they'll do a few books on subparts of that theater, and then maybe break it down to even like a battle in a subpart of it. So they're making money however they can.
So then, I don't know where I can say I've heard it. It has been said. We'll go with that the old guys play historicals and the younger guys do sci-fi fantasy. Would you say that's accurate? And if it is, why? Because, like, for example, I got into gaming when 40K already existed. Are you telling me as I get older I'm going to start abandoning it and heading towards the historicals? Like, what is it about it that the older gamers not necessarily give up sci-fi fantasy, but why is it they have more of a... Do you think they do have more of a leaning towards historical, and why?
I think a lot of it is how you came into the hobby. A lot of guys my age in their 50s and 60s started playing with historicals because there wasn't. They've been gaming for 30, 40 years, and GW really wasn't that big in the 70s. So I think that's part of it, is that they started with that, and that's just, again, once you hit 60 or so, it's hard to... You can remember shooting muskets at somebody across the field, but trying to remember that you got a plasma, I don't even know all the terminology, but you got a heavy bolter, but if you use this stratagem, you can bring this in from here, and then you can counter it with this buff from here. You don't do that in historical, so it's not hard to remember that stuff. But.
Okay, so then it's not necessarily it's not an age thing, it's a generation thing.
I think so.
So then the folks like me who got into it playing sci-fi and fantasy when I'm 60 years old, I won't be interested in whatever the current meta is. Instead, I'll probably want to stick with that's an interesting theory. For those of you listening, chime in if you think that's accurate, or if you think folks might change, wargaming focus for another reason. Okay, cool. So you've kind of dabbled in a little bit of everything. What specific gaming systems have you found that you thought really worked the best? They had enough complexity that they were fun, but not so much that you needed a degree just to understand them. What game systems have you really, really adhere to?
Let's see. Well, the easiest answer is historical game systems. I mean, I'll try to address some other ones, but the easiest game systems are historical ones like Black Powder. That was written, and this is kind of neat too. This is the neat thing. There's so much history in wargaming, in the history of wargaming. So Black Powder is put out by Warlord Games, written by guys who developed and started Games Workshop over the years. Rick Priestley. Mm-hmm. Rick Priestley is one of the main authors of Black Powder, which is a historical game set, but he also helped develop a lot of GW game systems and came from there. And there's several other people associated with Warlord, the same thing. So you see a lot of the D6-based rules where you roll to hit, you roll to save, you roll to kill. And that's classic, classic like Warhammer 40K stuff. So, but Black Powder is a really easy mechanic. It's also an easy mechanic because it does go back to GW roots that you can get people who play Warhammer to get over into historicals.
There's enough familiarity that it's not starting from scratch.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a very easy rule system. There's some nuances to it. They've come out, they've got Black Powder, which is literally any time of history when they were using black powder in rifles to fire. But then they've come out with the sub-books. You've got a book specific to the American Revolutionary War. You got a book specific to Napoleonics. You've got some for...
like 30 Years War or something like that.
30 Years War. So they've got books. So they come out with this generic... And this is something I've wished for a long, long, long time as a old time gamer, is give me a set of mechanics that I can use across multiple periods, so I don't have to learn a different set of rules for every single genre that I play.
You're just it's almost like it's the same game but changing skins, so to speak.
Exactly.
But you don't find that gets that gets boring or monotonous? That you're changing time period, but you're still playing the same game. That still works for you.
They've really done a good job of making rules that are specific to the different time periods. For instance, in Napoleonics, they went from fighting in line, like they do in the American Civil War, which is ironically later than the Napoleonic period. But they went from fighting in lines to fighting in attack columns for massed impact when they clashed. Well, the rules don't allow you to do that if you're playing American Revolutionary period. You cannot go into attack column. You have to fight in line, or you can be in march column. So they've built it into the rules where you can't take tactics from a different time period and use them in that time period. So
and because I've dabbled a bit in a lot of warlord games too. So all the way back to ancient. So you've got Hail Caesar, which is their ancient line, going clear up to American Civil War. I think is probably the last where you'd be able to do black powder. And yet it still seems to work across all of those. So even before there was black powder, Hail Caesar, there isn't gunpowder at all, but it still works. So among those games, do you gravitate to ancient, to Napoleonics? Like what's your favorite subset, or do you kind of dabble in everything?
I wish that I had a favorite subset. I've always envied these guys that you see that show up at a tournament and they've got an army where every stand looks like a mini diorama because they spend all their time on that one army and that's it. I'd have a lot more money in the bank or have a lot of other things if I didn't dabble in every period. But yeah, I love it all. I'd say my favorite period is probably 7 Years' War Napoleonics. Just because I just like the tactics of the period. I like the personalities of the period, but I'll play anything. I've got in my own collection, I've got armies from biblical all the way up through. I don't play with it, but I got a 40K army. So I'll play anything.
So then I'm saying this to try and remind myself. So two comments I wanted to build on. One is you said you really liked having one generic system, or not generic, but one base system that can then be adapted.
Yeah.
So how much have you dabbled in one-page rules? Or have you heard of it at all? Because that is exactly what that is. One system, 5 different games, and then you got war fleets off to the side. Have you played any of that?
I haven't. I know that you've talked about it. You've run it here in the shop. I've never gotten a chance to play them with you. I just haven't done it. Haven't picked them up. I've printed off some. I've downloaded some and printed them off to try out. And I just haven't done it.
So then that's my failure. Because as I'm listening to you talk here, you like it, that it's simple enough to still be enjoyable, but complex enough to have nuance. It's a uniform system that goes over everything. And here I am. I've never really forced you to sit down and play. We played some others. We played 40K. I think we played Sigmar, but we'd never done that one. Okay, cool. So then the other question is, when you mentioned, you see the guys with the really beautiful armies and the diorama type bases and all that. So tell me about the hobby side of the aspect. We've talked a little bit about how you like to play the games. Do you do the hobby as well? Are you big into the building and the painting and all that kind of stuff?
I'm not nuts about. I love the renaissance or the advent or whatever you want to call it of plastic miniatures, because I think that the detail that they've been able to put into them is fantastic compared to metal. Metal, they put some detail in, but it's just hard to get a lot of detail on a chunk of metal.
Yeah.
So I like the detail aspect of plastics. I don't like building them, because it's just used to. I sit down, I clean the metal, I prime it, I sit down and start painting. With plastics, you got to clip it off the sprues, you got to glue it all together, then you get to start painting. So it's almost like it's added a whole nother equal sized chunk of time to prepare.
Yeah, you don't realize how much time the building can take until you actually time it.
Yeah.
So someone once commissioned me to build and paint for them a Tau Riptide. And I thought, it'll take me about 20 minutes, 25 minutes to build it. It was over an hour just to build the thing. Yeah. And I realized I'm not charging enough. But, that's really fascinating, because usually when I talk to other wargamers, the build aspect is of the whole hobby thing. They like that the most because it's the biggest payoff for the shortest effort. Huh. That is, in 10 minutes, you go from pieces on a sprue to a 3-dimensional figure that you can now play with. Yeah. Whereas to go from gray and unpainted to painted can take hours and hours for just one. So usually the backlog is there.
Yeah.
But you do enjoy the painting side of it?
I do. I don't like the paint production. I like doing, like if I have a skirmish size army, like a kill team army, or some special units for Nighthaunt, because I've commissioned Nighthaunt to be painted. but like some special units for them, or the Blood Bowl teams, or something skirmish, I'll paint that myself, because it's something I can do easily enough. I mean, with my kids being so active, I don't have a lot of paint time at night. So I don't mind doing that. Or if I'm doing, say, a French Napoleonic army, I might need 400 figures. I don't want to paint 400, so when I can, I'll commission a lot of that out. But I'll paint like the Old Guard or some special unit. I'll paint those myself because I enjoy the research, looking at the uniforms, and then.
So you go for like, I wouldn't say like not like reenactment levels of accuracy, but you want to make sure that they look as close to it without going into crazy detail. Like, what shade of brass should the buttons be? That kind of thing.
Yeah, but I do. I mean, it is. It is. I'm particular enough that I like to. If a French line infantry company in Napoleonics, each company had a different colored pom pom. I kind of like them to all have their different colored pom poms instead of just saying, they all got blue pom poms and you're done with it. So some guys are fine with that. When you have 400 miniatures on the table, honestly, you never know.
Yeah.
But I kind of like for mine to be that accurate. But I don't go beyond that. So.
So yeah. You obviously mentioned you're a family man. You have a day job as well as running a shop, and you have a family. So how much time a week would you say you get to devote to the hobby?
To the painting and basing, to the non-gaming part of it. I usually I try every night to get in at least an hour and a half. Okay. The kids are doing something of their own, and they don't need me for anything, and there's nothing going on.
Because your kids are older, teenage and...
Yeah, they're all teenagers. So if they're doing stuff, then I might get a little bit more. I might sit down about 9:30 or so, but I'll stay up till 11 o'clock usually, and I'll be sitting painting. I've got my paint table set up, and so I can sit down and dive right into a project. So,
so what do you do while you're painting? Do you have the TV on, the radio? Like, I found everyone has something they like to do while they're painting. What's your preference?
I actually. Found a little smart TV with a 24-inch diagonal screen that fits right into it. My paint station is an old computer. In the old days, when you had like a computer desk as a workstation at home, and had the little flat top, and then has the upright part with a couple of shelves. So in there, I sit and paint on the flat top of it, and then I've got this 24-inch diameter smart TV in there, and so I'll sit and watch TV, or I've got a DVD player attached to it, so I'll pop in a movie if I want to.
See, there you've just dated yourself as well. Yeah. DVDs are apparently now the new LPs. Kids look at them like, what did you do with these things?
Yeah. I've got a box of them. So, but it's honestly, sometimes, I mean, for a while, until streaming caught on really big, you could get almost any movie streaming for free.
Right.
Well, now
you have to have subscriptions to 6 different things. Right. And I'm sure I'm old enough to remember, so obviously you are, when Netflix was a DVD mail service. You said, I want these discs, and they would mail them to you.
Yep.
And then for a time they had to deal with Blockbuster, where you could go in and trade in your DVDs to get one video rental to tide you over until your next ones were mailed to you. If you had told me back then that, one day you'll be able to just sit down at your phone or your tablet and watch whatever the heck you want. So, well, then there's an interesting thought experiment here. Think of it as a player. I know you have some thoughts about this as a shop owner. 3D printing.
Yeah.
So do you think how might 3D printing affect gaming, like in the way that streaming completely revolutionized how we watch movies? We don't rent anymore. There's no more video stores. Redbox is pretty much on its way out. What do you see 3D printing is doing to gaming?
A lot of, just from what I know, from talking to people, because like when I opened the shop 4 years ago, that first year there were like 6 people all said they were going to go out and buy 3D printers. And of those 6, I think 1 is actually still using their printer. So I think other than the data entry error part of it, people who actually stick with it, I think that, and what I'm seeing and what I think is going to happen is that small units or special models are going to be are more and more 3D printed. If somebody needs a Bane blade or whatever you want to call it, if somebody needs a tank or a particular robot for an army or something, I think that those 3D printing is definitely taken over that market. I think for like historicals or something where you need lots of miniatures, it hasn't gotten there yet. If they get 3D printing to the point where somebody can print either faster or print multiple models, like if you need for a decent size historical, say Napoleonic's army, you need probably about 300 or 400 miniatures. If you can sit down and 3D print 10 at a time and do those 10 at a time in a few hours period so that in the course of a day you can literally print 100 miniatures, then it's going to take over everything.
Oh, well, then in that case, it's already here then.
Really?
The 3D printer I got, I have a Elegoo Saturn. And on that build plate, if we're talking historical size, 28 millimeter historical, I could probably fit about 30 models on a single build plate.
Really?
So I could print a regiment or two
Holy
at
cow.
a time. So yeah, I know what you're talking about. When they first came out, the printers could print like one character, but now and they're getting even bigger. So I've had my printer for a couple of years, but
I had no idea.
But yeah, I'm looking at for Warhammer Fantasy doing an old High Elf army. I found a guy who put up STL files for free, which was really nice. That are basically the old Games Workshop High Elves, but with enough tweaks that they're not violating copyright. Yeah. And those guys stood like ramrod straight, just holding a spear straight up, so I could pack them cheek by jowl on that build plate. I could probably print 30 or 40 at a time.
I didn't know that, so we probably should talk off camera, so to speak. So.
But you did bring up something interesting, though, that all these people who said they were going to start it, they're not still doing it. And I'm like got 1 foot in each, because I looked at the potential of what it could do, and I thought, this is going to revolutionize wargaming. And it is. But then I got one and realized it's not just like installing a new game from Steam and playing it. As I've heard many folks say, it's a hobby unto itself. Yeah, and if you don't enjoy it, it becomes work. And so I'm one of those, I have to wait a few weeks or months before I really have enough models and the desire's really there. Okay, I want to do this. But there's no impulse printing, at least not for me. Okay. Maybe it's partly my setup, because where it is, it stinks. The smell of the resin's pretty bad, and I only have just one room where I build, paint, and play. So if I'm printing something, I can't do a whole lot else in there. So
I think several of the things you just said are the things that are keeping it from really exploding right now. I mean, if you have a place to do it, and you have decent ventilation, and you have the time to do it, and you have the money to buy the resin or whatever the material is and everything, and you buy the ST, if you do all those steps, then you can print yourself an army.
Yeah.
But of all the guys that I know who have passed through the shop, who either still have or have had a 3D printer, if there's 12 people, it's probably you and maybe one other guy, the only ones who actually can fill in all those requirements to actually continue to 3D print. So I think that's a lot of it. That will hold it back from taking over the miniatures industry, because you might be able to print an army, but you're not going to print them for 5 other people, or at a production level. And until you can do mass 3D printing at production levels, so that you can sell. Like, I'm a little store. If I buy 5 boxes of Napoleonic plastic figures from Warlord, think about every store around the world that needs to buy them. Until people can 3D print them on that level, then they're still it's just easier to buy them.
Well, yeah, there's a couple of things to that. So first, you mentioned your first foray into sci-fi wargaming was War Machine. So was it last year, released a new edition of War Machine?
Yeah.
They're going entirely 3D to print their minis. And they showed a picture. They have this room that had a wall probably about 20, 30 feet with 3 shelves. And each shelf had 10 to 15 3D printers. And that may have not been everything they had. They are 3D printing everything. So while I think you're right, I don't see the future where every wargamer has a little 3D printer. There's too much work for that. Yeah. But I do see it becoming a major source of production. Challenging plastic, challenging pewter. Like, you could have on Etsy. I don't know how often you go on Etsy. I recently bought an entire fantasy dwarf army. Like well over 100 individual figures for less than probably half the cost of, compared to like the new starter boxes for Warhammer Old World. I probably got twice the models for half the price.
Really? Yeah.
And those guys are doing it more professionally, good resin, good printers and all that. And I've been painting them up and they're absolutely fantastic. In fact, anyone who watches any of those recent painting videos that I've posted on the channel, those are 3D printed models.
Oh.
So I am very curious to see how some of these big model production companies like Games Workshop are going to approach it. So there are, like you said, there's definitely things that are holding it back from just completely dominating, but I definitely don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon.
No.
I think it's going to be there for forever.
I think something you just said too, I think that one thing that's going to have to change for 3D printed models to really explode and take over the market is the major miniatures manufacturers switching over. Because right now, if Privateer Press is doing their War Machine stuff 3D printed, they're one of the few big names, and they're not a big name. I mean, we know who they are.
Everyone's heard of them, but they're not Games Workshop.
Yeah,
they're not Willer Games.
But a lot of the big names, Old Glory is a big historicals miniature manufacturer. They're actually probably, once the guy who established it, once he decides to retire completely, I've heard that they may just stop manufacturing at all.
Oh, wow.
And they're all metal, and they're all old molds. They're not making new molds. But as far as major manufacturers of miniatures, it's pretty much Games Workshop, Warlord. There's a few other kind of big
Wargames
names,
Atlantic is kind of sneaking in that niche of
Wargames
cheaper
Atlantic,
but still decent quality by not having quite as many sculpts. You buy one of their boxes, there's 5 different poses, if you will. 30 miniatures, but 5 different poses. But, I mean, if you're doing rank and flank, if you're doing historical, you don't need each of your models to look like a hero from some kind of novel or comic book, like what you get in Games Workshop stuff or War Machine or something. There doesn't need to be that much character.
You got 24 guys in a unit of infantry. They can all look the same.
Yep.
They don't have to all look unique and different. So, that's. I think that's going to be once those companies either stop producing and somebody else steps in and takes over, or they make the switch from metal molds or plastic injection like GW does until they make the switch over. And GW is kind of, we'll go off on a tangent here. We'll probably do a whole podcast just on GW because they're an anomaly. They're the only company, I've been gaming for a long time. They're the only company I know who consistently will make their models out of what theoretically should be cheaper. Injection molding should be cheaper than metal molding. It's less labor intensive. You can get better detail. The molds last longer from what I've heard. I mean, it should be cheaper, and yet they charge more.
Well, one of the biggest video series on my channel was my comparing one-page rules to Games Workshop, and that was one of the things I looked at was cost, business model.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have any degrees in business. I've never owned a business. But just from the gamer's perspective, it's that same question. Like, why is it the prices keep going up? And I understand they've got to cover costs when they do new molds and stuff, but not that much.
No. Even when Warlord started putting out resin models, which hasn't really gone, they came out with some historical miniatures in a resin that reminded me of the fine cast stuff that GW did a while back, or Forge, whoever it was, and just didn't quite work right. They're a little too flexible. They don't hold up well. They get warm in your car, then the lances drag it.
They'll bend and melt.
Yeah. So that didn't really go well. So they're still doing mainly plastic injection molding, like styrene plastic or something. But the prices didn't come down. The prices went up. And so, I mean, part of it is a function of the world we live in. Inflation got rampant for a while, and prices went up. And then once you raise prices on people,
you're not going to lower them.
You're
never going to lower them.
Yeah. So part of it's that. But I just think that even though it's cheaper to make some of this stuff, the world is making prices go up and up and up. And I think that may help too at some point if some small individuals say, enough's enough. I'm going to start putting out big armies for people to buy through 3D printing, then it'll
and that's what got me into it. So I looked at the cost of the printer, and like computers, they're getting cheaper as they get better.
Yeah.
But when I bought mine, I don't know if I want to admit, because then people will be like, oh, you paid too much for it. I think it was about $400 or $500 for the printer. And then the software was free, but I had to buy, a rebreather. I had to buy the wash and curing station. It was a fairly hefty investment. But then for $40, I can get a bottle of resin, and I printed a 2,000-point army in one-page rules.
Wow, really?
So if for $40 I can print an entire army, so the good side is, I can make my investment back fairly quickly. The bad side is, if the process wasn't what was holding me back, I'd be drowning in models at this point. Yeah. If it was to the degree where you could just push a button and without any smell or cleanup or anything, I could just crank out minis. And if they get to that point, it will be very interesting to see what happens to prices from other companies who are selling miniatures by plastic or pewter when they just can't compete with that. There's a guy I interviewed previously, a podcast that's not out yet, but it'll be out before this one. He prints an army a week.
Really?
Well, he has a channel. His name's Warboss Fitz, and he's all in on 3D printing and on one-page rules. And so for his channel, he asks his viewers, what army do you want to see this week? And they tell him, and then he prints one.
Wow.
So he prints an entire army every single week. Prints, paints, and plays with a new army every single week. So that's dedication. I don't have that kind of dedication.
Does he have a real job, or is that his job?
He does. No, he has a real job too.
Really?
When I interview him, he says he works all day. The printer's running almost 24/7 because he has a dedicated space for it.
Wow.
And then he does the slap chop painting method, where I don't know if you're familiar with that at all. So you prime the model, usually in a black, a dark color, and then you give it another coating of a white or a light gray, but not completely over. Instead, you get highlighted, not quite a zenithal highlight, but you spray enough that under the arms, lower areas underneath are still the black, but the rest is the white, and then you paint a translucent, like a contrast speed paint.
Okay.
And the base coat provides the highlights and the shades for you.
Right.
And with that, you can paint stuff incredibly fast.
Yeah.
And they do a nice dry brush on top to kind of pull it all together. But an army a week.
Wow. I wish.
Yeah.
God, I wish.
You talk about your backlog. Oh, well, we're on that question then. How bad's your pile of shame?
Oh, jeez. Oh, my gosh.
Oh, do you not want me to go there? Is that too painful?
I literally, on my paint table, I've got like 4 samurai that I was painting for a Test of Honor army. They've been sitting there for probably 6-7 years now. I just haven't gotten back to them. Wow. But I don't want to put them away. So, but no, I've got, right now on my paint table, I've literally got like 3 or 4 samurai for Test of Honor. I've got a ship for Cruel Seas, like a 1/300 scale PT type boat for the English. So anyway, I've got that. I've got a couple of Napoleonic 28mm Napoleonic officer figures that I'm working on. I even have a biker and his girlfriend model for that Project Z zombie game that I got them assembled, but I never did paint them. So they're all sitting there on my paint table. And then, of course, in my game closet, I mean, I have a lot of painted miniatures, and I probably have at least that many unpainted miniatures just waiting to be painted. So
okay, because when you first started saying, well, I have this one model I haven't painted, and these two, I thought, Rob, that's not a pile of shame.
No. I've got, I started, before I opened the shop, I wanted to it was my, back in the 1840s or something like that, when the English were still in control of India. There were the Sikh Wars, where the Sikh nation rose up against the English. And really, probably the only colonial army that could have actually beaten the British at that time, which is saying a lot, except for the politics of their leaders. The Rajas and stuff found it more profitable and more lucrative to sell out their own armies to the British. So, but they were the only ones. So I wanted to do that project. So I have probably 500 or 600 miniatures for that project that have been sitting in the closet since 2020.
Still in the shrink wrap? Just about?
Yep,
wow.
Pretty much. Yep, still all bagged up. And not even primed. Oh yeah, they're just raw. I have, since you opened this Pandora's box, in my game closet right now of unpainted miniatures, I've got those. I've got World War I models for a skirmish game. For Blood and Valor. Blood and Valor is the World War I version. I've got some ECW figures. I've got a lot of stuff.
And most of it's historical, it sounds like.
Yeah, most of it's historical.
And
yeah.
I think that, I don't want to say that makes sense, but because historical takes so many figures, anyone who plays a rank and flank game can appreciate this. Like if you have 20 models, you got yourself one unit. Whereas if you're playing a skirmish game or even sci-fi, you don't need as many models.
Yeah.
And you can always shift to playing a more elite army. Like I started that custodian army in 40K just because I like the idea of an entire 2,000 point army being like 10 guys. It'd be quick to build, quick to paint, easy to control on the table. I don't have as much to worry about. But when I started painting those dwarves for one-page rules, regiments, and fantasy, 20 guys, that's one unit.
Yeah.
I've got another 10 units. And you just stare at it and think, I like the painting side of this.
Yeah.
And that's still daunting to me. That's still very daunting.
I think that's what drew me over to actually start playing some fantasy and sci-fi stuff, is that I'd been painting armies of historical miniatures where I had to do 200, 300, 400 miniatures for an army. So when somebody said, hey, let's play Necromunda, you need to paint 10 models. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's awesome.
I can do that.
And I can put incredible detail on those 10 models because I can pay a lot of attention to them. So yeah, I jumped in and I did a kill team army, of a dozen models, and then a Necromunda army. And I think I slipped up when I got into Age of Sigmar because I started looking at Nighthaunt that way and then realized that it's not just one unit.
It's more of a big horde. So all right, cool. Well, we're getting close to the end here. I suppose we'll tie it back a little bit here. Just a couple other questions. So, with having done this for so long, any of your family ever get into it?
No, it's been a frustration because I have old daughters, and so I got them to help me.
What are you
paint
saying?
some
Girls
models.
can't play miniature games, Rob?
I loved it. Well, we're getting more and more in the shop, so I'm glad to see that. But I guess I did not do a good job of introducing them to it. One time, real quickly, I'll tell you. One time, there was a game. Milton Bradley came out with a game years ago called Battlemaster. It was called Battlemaster. Do you remember that?
I have. The first battle report I ever posted on the channel was my daughter, Rob, and I playing Battlemasters.
Yeah. Well, I bought it back when it came out in the 80s. And so I had a bit of nostalgia a few years back. And so I looked on the internet. I found it. I bought it for an atrociously high price off of eBay because that's the only place you can find it. So I got Battlemasters. I put all the models together. I set it up on my game table at home. And I have a 34-year-old daughter and plus my 3 teenage daughters. So I had my literally oldest, when this is probably 4 years ago. So say she was 30, playing against my oldest and my younger 3, who was probably 12 at the time. And it got so competitive. I've never seen 2 guys in a game shop go at it the way they were going at it.
Wow.
And when it was over with, nobody wanted to play anything for a long time. So
okay, so wow. So maybe in that case it was for the better.
Yeah.
You got super competitive
I'm very competitive
children. Okay.
Yeah.
I had a similar experience, and then we'll tie it to the end here. Some friends of mine, they had always heard about the Kingdom. They wanted to come up and see, because they didn't play any games, but it was a newlywed couple. I knew their parents really well, newlywed couple, and the husband, he wanted to get into D&D and painting figures for that. And so he came over because I was going to show him some basics of painting and recommend some equipment and stuff. And while they were there, I said, hey, do you guys want to do just a quick game? See what it's like to play. I can't remember if we played 40K or one-page rules, but so I made the mistake. I said, how do you guys want to set up the teams? You want to do, the husband and wife on a team? And they said, no, we'll play each other. And by the time they left, they weren't talking to each other. So I hope I didn't end a marriage there. But that was kind of fun. Awesome. Well, thank you for sitting down, having a chat with me.
Sure, man.
And talking about the long perspective of wargaming, from before Games Workshop existed and it was all historicals to now you've got 3D printing. You've kind of got to see it all. Any last words of wisdom, last thoughts, anything like that before we call it a day?
It's just, again, I have been playing it for a long time. It is a fun hobby, and I love it whenever we get new people come into the shop or just new people come into a group who want to get into gaming and then stay with it, because it's been very good to me. It's a great socialization environment, and you learn a lot about winning and losing, or you better anyway, because you know how my dice are. You do not win all the time.
No. Rob and I have learned we probably should never play against each other because we both roll so awfully that we will tear a hole in the fabric of reality.
Yeah, it just won't work.
It can't. You can't have that much bad luck all in one place. Cool. Well, thanks again to everyone. Sure. Thanks for joining us for the podcast here. Please check out the other videos on the channel. Remember to keep your dice on the table, and it doesn't have to be perfect as long as it's good enough.